Selah Whitmore stood alone at the edge of the Whitmore penthouse balcony, staring down at the glittering Manhattan skyline as if it were a world she had been allowed to observe but never join. She was 28 now, 2 decades into the role her parents had rehearsed for her. The slow one, the fragile one, the girl born with dyslexia and therefore, according to them, born with limits. Inside the penthouse, laughter swelled around the long mahogany dining table. "Cameron has done it again," her father, Theodore Whitmore, boomed to the guests. "Harvard's finest. Our family's pride." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Cameron, 3 years older and polished to perfection, smiled with the poise of a woman accustomed to admiration. Selah slipped inside, taking a seat near the end of the table. No one noticed. They never did. Her mother, Lillian Whitmore, leaned toward a cluster of guests and whispered loudly, "Poor Selah. The tutors did what they could, but some children simply aren't built for academics." A ripple of sympathetic nods followed. Selah looked down at her plate, steadying her breath. She had learned long ago not to cry where anyone could see. Beneath the table, a soft tap on her ankle. She glanced up and met the sharp, knowing eyes of her grandmother, Geneva Whitmore, seated directly opposite. Geneva's expression was cool fire, a heat reserved for injustice. With a subtle nod toward Selah, she murmured, "Lift your head, darling. Their ignorance is not your reflection." It was the only kindness Selah had received tonight. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Geneva had already begun preparing a truth that would rewrite the entire Whitmore legacy. Tonight's cruelty would not be forgotten. Geneva never forgot. The night after the Christmas dinner, Geneva called Selah to her Upper West Side apartment. The old building, lined with brass railings and vintage murals, smelled of polished wood and jasmine tea, Geneva's signature blend. "Sit," she instructed, lowering herself onto her favorite armchair. Selah obeyed, still raw from the humiliation her parents had served her like dessert. Geneva studied her granddaughter for a long moment. "Tell me what they said." Selah hesitated. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Geneva countered sharply. Selah swallowed. "Dad announced Cameron's Harvard acceptance." Then he said, "And Selah is also here." Everyone laughed. Geneva's eyes darkened. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that I try my best." Selah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They didn't mean harm." Geneva leaned forward. "Cruelty wrapped in silk is still cruelty." She reached for Selah's hand, her voice softening. "You think you are slow because they told you that story before you were old enough to challenge it. Dyslexia is not a limitation, only a different doorway." Selah looked away. "Dad says I'll never excel." "Your father confuses speed with intelligence," Geneva said. "He reads quickly but understands little about people. You read slowly, but you see everything." She stood with effort, crossed to a small cabinet, and retrieved a polished mahogany box with brass hinges. "I want you to keep this." Selah frowned. "What is it?" "Not yet," Geneva said firmly. "You'll open it when the moment is right. And trust me, child, Theodore will make sure that moment arrives." Selah held the box as though it might burn her fingers. Geneva touched her cheek. "You were never the weak one. You were simply the one they feared would discover her worth." When Selah graduated from a small state university in 2022, a milestone no one in her family bothered to attend, she applied for an administrative job at Whitmore Holdings, the real estate empire her grandmother had built and her father now commanded. Theodore approved the hire with the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to water a houseplant. "Entry level," he said flatly. "Salary $42,000. Filing, scheduling basic tasks. Nothing too demanding." Cameron, meanwhile, entered the firm the same month as chief legal counsel with a starting salary nearly 7 times higher. "She's the future of this company," Theodore announced to the board. "Selah will assist." Assist meant photocopying documents, fetching coffee, booking conference rooms for executives who barely glanced at her name badge. For months, Selah worked in a quiet corner beside the massive high-speed printer, listening to the rhythm of power in the hallways. But something unexpected happened there, something her parents never saw coming. When executives discussed deals near the copy room, their words became puzzles Selah learned to solve visually. She sketched diagrams, arrows, money flows. Her dyslexia forced her to picture information rather than read it, and those pictures revealed patterns no spreadsheet could. One afternoon, while sketching a complex partnership structure she overheard, her co-worker Patricia Morales paused beside her. "Selah, this is brilliant." Selah startled. "It's just how I take notes." Patricia shook her head. "This is analysis. The kind analysts struggle to do." Word never reached Theodore. It wasn't meant to. Yet Geneva's voice echoed in Selah's memory. "You read slower but you see deeper." And Selah did see deeper. Especially the cracks in the empire her father believed was unbreakable. In early 2024, an email slid into Selah's inbox like a guillotine. "Position restructuring, confidential." Her eyes blurred as she read it. "Your position will be eliminated effective July 1st. HR will contact you regarding severance." She reread it 5 times, the letters dancing, rearranging. Her dyslexia turning bad news into worse confusion. That evening, she stayed late to finish tasks no one valued. Through the thin wall beside her cubicle, she heard her parents' voices in Theodore's office. Lillian's tone was light, as if discussing theater tickets. "She'll understand, Theo. She never expected a career." Theodore scoffed. "We can't have her here when Cameron takes over. It looks pathetic, the CEO's daughter pushing paper. People will ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "Why she isn't in leadership. Why she's limited." Lillian sighed. "We protected her as long as we could." Selah's throat tightened. Protected. They had dismissed her, minimized her, erased her. Theodore continued. "We'll give her severance. She can find something simple. Something suited to her abilities." Selah pressed her palm to the cubicle wall, feeling it vibrate with their words. She lived in a shared apartment in Queens. She had no savings, no financial cushion, no support. Losing this job meant losing the fragile stability she'd pieced together. But beneath her fear, something ignited. A quiet, unwavering refusal. She would not let them script her ending. When she left the office that night, the city lights shimmered like coded messages only she could decipher. Geneva had warned her. "One day he will show you exactly who he is." That day had arrived. Selah just didn't know the next day would change everything. May 15, 2024. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glowed with chandeliers, champagne towers, and 350 elite guests gathered to celebrate Cameron Whitmore's Harvard Law graduation. Theodore stood on stage, radiating the pride he never spared for Selah. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "my brilliant daughter will inherit the Whitmore estate and someday the company itself." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Selah, seated at the far back near the service entrance, felt the words like a slap. Her mother approached, expression pinched. "Sit up straight," Lillian whispered. "Try not to draw attention. Tonight is not about you." Selah nodded, swallowing the humiliation. She had perfected the art of becoming invisible. But someone else had not forgotten her. A silver-haired man stood near the entrance, watching her intently. His gaze wasn't pity, it was purpose. When the applause faded, he walked toward table 27, stopping beside her. "Miss Whitmore." She stiffened. "Yes." He extended a crisp business card. "Victor Ames, Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I represented your grandmother, Geneva." Selah blinked. "My grandmother passed away 3 years ago." "I'm aware," Ames said. "She left instructions for me. Very specific instructions about you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope stamped with a notary's red wax seal. "This is for you. Geneva told me to deliver it on the day your father publicly disinherited you." Selah stared at him, breath shallow. "I don't understand." "You will," Ames said quietly. "I believe this qualifies as that day." The ballroom noise faded into nothing. Selah held the heavy envelope as though it were a living thing. Inside it lay the truth Geneva had safeguarded. The truth that would shatter everything Theodore claimed tonight. And Selah, long overlooked, long underestimated, was about to open it. Selah slipped out of the ballroom, the envelope clutched to her chest. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she ducked into a quiet service hallway lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs. She broke the wax seal with trembling hands. 3 pages slid out. Dense legal text, notarized, dated September 12, 2019. Her grandmother's handwritten signature curled elegantly across the bottom. She inhaled sharply when she reached the central clause. To my granddaughter Selah and Whitmore, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitmore Holdings, along with all associated voting rights. Selah felt the world tilt. 51%. Control. Ownership. The right to decide the company's future. She read the passage again, forcing the letters into focus. Geneva had stripped Theodore of power from beyond the grave. A soft gasp escaped her. Then she read the next paragraph. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Theodore's treatment of Selah. She has been excluded, belittled, and denied opportunity, not due to inability, but due to his refusal to see her potential. Selah pressed a hand over her mouth as tears stung her eyes. She whispered, "You saw me, Grandma. You really saw me." Another clause followed. To activate this bequest, Selah must request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. 72 hours. Victor Ames's words echoed. She left instructions. Very specific. Selah folded the will carefully, wiped her eyes, and straightened her shoulders. She was done being invisible. Done being the Whitmore family's quiet secret. Geneva had built Whitmore Holdings. Theodore only inherited it. And Selah, ignored, underestimated, pushed aside, now held the key to its future. She whispered into the empty hallway. "Okay, Grandma. Hear you. I'm ready." When Selah returned to the ballroom, Victor Ames was waiting near the coat check. "You read it," he said. Selah nodded. "The 72-hour rule. Why would she make that condition?" Ames's voice softened. "Because your grandmother knew you. She knew you'd hesitate if you had unlimited time. Knew you might convince yourself you weren't worthy." Selah's throat tightened. "She wanted me to be brave. She wanted you to take what belongs to you." Ames pulled out a second card, handwritten number on the back. "Call me tomorrow morning. We'll draft the request for an emergency board meeting." Through the ballroom door, Selah saw her father laughing with guests, Cameron glowing beside him. They were basking in a future that wasn't theirs. Ames followed her gaze. "They don't know it yet," he murmured. "But everything changed the moment you opened that envelope." Selah slipped the will into her small clutch purse. "If I do this, I'll lose whatever family I have left." Ames studied her quietly. "Did you ever really have them?" The question hit harder than she expected. She steadied her breath, watching Theodore lift his champagne glass to toast Cameron again. She remembered the email firing her. The dinner table where she was mocked. The years of being dismissed, ignored, erased. "What happens if I do nothing?" she asked. "Then your father takes everything," Ames replied. "He becomes exactly what Geneva feared." Selah nodded slowly. "And if I act? Then you become exactly who she believed you could be." The orchestra resumed playing. The crowd resumed clapping. Life continued as if nothing had shifted. But inside Selah something monumental had. She turned away from the celebration. "I'll call you in the morning, Mr. Ames. We're doing this." Back in her cramped Queen's apartment that night, Selah sat cross-legged on her bed with a mahogany box Geneva had given her years ago. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, striping the box in pale silver. Her fingers traced the brass hinges before she finally lifted the lid. Inside lay a handwritten letter, a faded document dated 1965, and a sleek USB drive. Selah unfolded the letter first. Geneva's familiar cursive swept across the page. My dearest Selah, if you're reading this, then your father has shown you exactly who he is, and Victor has delivered the will. I cannot protect you in life, but I can protect you in legacy. Selah's breath hitched. The letter continued. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement for Whitmore Holdings. Your father has never seen it. It states that founder shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without unanimous board approval. Selah blinked hard. Permanent voting rights. Geneva had ensured that Theodore could never quietly sideline her. She reached for the USB drive. Geneva's letter warned. This contains the minutes from your father's attempt in 2018 to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. He claimed I was too old to understand modern business. The board rejected his proposal. His resentment toward you began that day, because he needed a narrative to justify why he should lead. Weakening you strengthened his story. Selah closed her eyes as the truth sank in. Theodore's cruelty hadn't been accidental, had been strategic, purposeful, a narrative he crafted to maintain power. She whispered. He wasn't protecting me, he was protecting himself. The city hummed outside her window. For the first time in her life, Selah didn't feel small. She felt armed. And Geneva had placed every weapon carefully in her hands. The next morning, Selah called Victor Ames. I'm ready, she said before he could speak. Then let's begin, he replied. Victor looped in Margaret Coleman, a board member and longtime ally of Geneva. Her voice crackled through the phone with sharp warmth. Selah Whitmore. I've been waiting for this call. Selah straightened instinctively. Mrs. Coleman, call me Margaret. Your grandmother adored you. She told me you see structures the way she did. Selah flushed. I'm not sure about that. I am, Margaret said briskly. Now listen. To request an emergency board meeting, you need signatures from 3 sitting board members. You already have mine. I'll get Richard Holloway and Susan Parker. They've grown tired of your father's theatrics. Selah's eyes widened. They'll support me. They'll support stability. And right now that's you. By noon, Margaret texted. Petition signed. Board meeting scheduled for May 18th, 10 a.m. Selah stared at her phone. 48 hours from now, she would confront her father in the one room he believed she'd never enter. That afternoon at Whitmore Holdings, Selah returned to her cubicle, pretending to file papers. But tension vibrated through the building. At 4:45 p.m., Cameron called. What did you do? She demanded before Selah could speak. Dad just got a notice. Emergency board meeting? Do you think this is a game? Selah kept her voice even. I have business with the board. You? Cameron scoffed. Selah, you work in the copy room. And yet somehow I have business. Cameron inhaled sharply. If you're trying to embarrass us. I'm not trying, Selah said calmly. I'm succeeding. Cameron's silence was cold. You're making a mistake. Selah ended the call without replying. Minutes later, Theodore stormed past her cubicle, slamming his office door so hard the glass rattled. Selah exhaled slowly. The war had begun. The morning of May 18th dawned crisp and bright, but Selah felt none of the sunlight as she stepped onto the 42nd floor of Whitmore Tower. Her borrowed gray blazer hung slightly too big on her shoulders, and her second-hand portfolio felt impossibly small for the weight it carried. Security guards stopped her. Ma'am, this meeting is restricted. You're not on the authorized attendee list. Selah lifted her chin. I am a Whitmore employee and a shareholder. I have business with the board. Before the guard could respond, a familiar voice sliced through the hallway. Selah. Cameron approached, immaculate in a navy power suit. She eyed Selah with a mixture of pity and irritation. This isn't appropriate. The board doesn't need distractions. Selah folded her arms. I'm not a distraction. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment, Selah replied evenly. Cameron's smirk faltered. Footsteps clicked sharply down the hall. Theodore appeared, jaw clenched. "Selah, go back to your desk. This is not your world." A new voice came from behind him. "Actually, it is." Margaret Coleman stepped out of the boardroom, silver hair gleaming under the recessed lights. "I invited Miss Whitmore. She has full standing to address this board." The hallway fell silent. Theodore bristled. "Margaret, this is ridiculous." "Ridiculous," Margaret repeated, "is a CEO who believes intimidation is strategy." She gestured for Selah to enter. "Come in, dear." Theodore's glare burned into her, but Selah walked forward anyway. The boardroom was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, 12 leather chairs, a long table polished to a mirror shine. At the far end hung a portrait of Geneva Whitmore. Selah paused, meeting her grandmother's painted gaze. And for the first time she felt like she belonged in this room. She sat down. The battle was about to begin. The boardroom buzzed with low conversation as Selah took her seat at the far end of the long walnut table. Theodore sat at the head, his posture rigid, hands clasped tightly as if holding the room together by force. Cameron, though not a board member, sat at his right in a tailored posture of superiority. Across the table, Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged curious glances. Chairman Robert Hartley adjusted his glasses and tapped the table lightly. "This emergency session is now called to order." The request was initiated by Margaret Coleman. "Margaret, you have the floor." Margaret rose slowly, her presence commanding despite her age. "Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. The matter I wish to bring to the board concerns a document recently delivered to Miss Selah Whitmore, one with significant implications for this company's ownership structure." She stepped aside. "I yield my time to Miss Whitmore." All eyes turned toward Selah. She stood, steadying her voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Coleman." Before she could continue, Theodore raised a hand sharply. "Robert, before we waste the board's time." "Mr. Whitmore," Hartley interrupted, "you'll have an opportunity to respond. Sit down." Irritation flashed across Theodore's face, but he complied. Cameron leaned toward him, whispering something Selah couldn't hear. Selah inhaled deeply. "I know many of you don't know me well," she began, her voice level. "My father has ensured that my role here stayed small, quiet, and unnoticed. But my grandmother, Geneva Whitmore, did not see me that way." She opened her portfolio and removed the document. "This is her last will and testament, executed September 12, 2019. Theodore lurched forward. "Impossible. My mother's will was executed in 2015. "This supersedes it," Selah replied, sliding the will toward Chairman Hartley. "And it changes everything." A hush fell over the boardroom as Jonathan Ellis rose from his seat in the corner, briefcase in hand. "Mr. Hartley," he said, his voice crisp, "if I may." Hartley nodded. "Please proceed." Jonathan approached the table, laying out authentication documents. "My name is Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as legal counsel to Geneva Whitmore for 13 years. I witnessed the execution of this document personally, along with 2 independent notaries. Additionally, the original is stored in escrow at Chase Private Client." He placed a verification letter beside the will. "This is legally binding." Cameron snapped. "Forgery. It has to be." Jonathan didn't flinch. "Accusations of fraud without evidence would put you in legal danger, Miss Whitmore." Cameron's mouth slammed shut. Theodore's voice shook with controlled fury. "She manipulated my mother. My mother was ill." "Actually," Selah interjected, her voice surprisingly firm, "I have evidence that she wasn't." She withdrew her phone, opening an audio file. "This is from a 2018 board meeting. My grandmother recorded it as a majority shareholder. It's her right under company bylaws." She pressed play. Theodore's own voice filled the room. 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I'm moving to reduce her voting rights from 51% to 10%. The room went still. Margaret's jaw tightened. Susan Parker covered her mouth. Chairman Hartley looked as though someone had punched him. Selah paused the recording. This will and the partnership agreement in my possession show that Geneva was fully competent. She made deliberate decisions, even after becoming aware of my father's attempt to strip her authority. She lifted her gaze to the board. She left her controlling shares to me because she trusted me to protect this company from misuse. Across the table, Theodore's face drained of color. For the first time he looked afraid. Miss Whitmore, Chairman Hartley said slowly, would you share the relevant section aloud? For the record. Selah nodded, her hand steady as she held the document. To my granddaughter Selah and Whitmore, she read clearly. I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitmore Holdings, along with all voting rights associated therewith. A ripple of shock moved around the table. Selah continued, her voice strengthening. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Theodore's treatment of Selah. She has been excluded, belittled, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Cameron stiffened. Theodore's jaw clenched. Selah went on. Selah is not slow. Selah was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. The last sentence echoed through the room like a verdict. Selah set the will down. Jonathan Ellis stepped forward again. Per the will, Miss Whitmore is now the majority shareholder. Her authority is immediate. Theodore slammed his fist on the table. This is outrageous. She can't run a company. She can barely run an email inbox. Good thing I'm not asking to run the company, Selah replied coolly. I'm asking the board to examine the facts. She held up the printed minutes from 2018, including evidence of my father's attempt to illegally alter founder voting rights. Richard Holloway cleared his throat. I remember this, he murmured. Geneva called me that night. She was furious, but she didn't want to embarrass Theodore publicly. Margaret nodded. She told me the same. All eyes turned back to Theodore. His own board, his kingdom was slipping from his grasp. Selah met his gaze without flinching. Grandma wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She chose me. Theodore stared at her, chest rising and falling. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed. Selah straightened. I know exactly what I'm doing. Chairman Hartley exhaled slowly. At this point, he said, the board's legal counsel must confirm the document's legitimacy before we proceed. Their attorney, Mr. Patterson, had already been reviewing the materials. He now cleared his throat. I've spoken with Morrison and Blake, confirmed the notary records, and verified the escrow copy's existence. The will is valid under New York law. A murmur spread across the board. Theodore's glare could have cut steel. Cameron's composure fractured, panic flickering across her face. Patterson continued. Furthermore, the partnership agreement Miss Whitmore provided is authentic and confirms permanent voting rights for founder shares. Chairman Hartley folded his hands. Then we must acknowledge Miss Whitmore as the majority shareholder. Theodore shot to his feet. This is a sham. She doesn't understand our business. She was hired to make copies. Copies, Selah said evenly. That taught me everything I needed to know about how you run this company. Cameron stood too. Selah, think about what you're doing. This will destroy us. Selah met her eyes. You destroyed me first. Silence. Jonathan Ellis stepped forward. Miss Whitmore, as majority shareholder, you now have the right to propose motions to the board. The moment hung thick and electric. Theodore's stare dared her to strike. Selah inhaled deeply. I have one motion, she said. Chairs shifted. Breaths caught. I propose a vote of confidence regarding Theodore Whitmore's continued position as CEO. Theodore's voice cracked. You little. If the board believes you are fit to lead, Selah said calmly, you'll remain CEO. If not, you step down. Chairman Hartley nodded. A lawful motion. Do we have a second? Margaret's hand rose immediately. Seconded. Theodore sank into his chair, face ashen. You won't win, he whispered. Selah looked straight ahead. We'll let the board decide. Chairman Hartley raised his hand. All those expressing confidence in Theodore Whitmore as CEO, raise your hands. For hands rose. Theodore's closest allies, individuals whose positions depended on his approval. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands lifted instantly. Susan Parker, Richard Holloway, Margaret Coleman, and 4 others who had once feared Theodore but no longer needed to. 1 board member abstained. Chairman Hartley marked the tally. Motion carries. 7-4 with 1 abstention. The words struck the room like a thunderbolt. Theodore's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Cameron stared at him, stunned. Hartley closed his folder decisively. Per Section 14.3 of our bylaws, Mr. Whitmore, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Theodore rose slowly, as if gravity had doubled. He turned to Selah, not with rage, but with a hollow look she had never seen on him before. Recognition. The realization that the daughter he ridiculed, minimized, and dismissed had dismantled his power in a single morning. You think this makes you strong, he rasped. I didn't do this to be strong, Selah replied softly. I did this to be seen. Theodore's shoulders sagged. Without another word, he walked out of the boardroom, Cameron trailing behind him, her polished confidence shattered. When the door closed, the room exhaled as one. Margaret placed a hand on Selah's shoulder. Your grandmother would be proud. Jonathan Ellis gave a single nod, the lawyer's version of applause. Chairman Hartley addressed the board. We will meet again this afternoon to discuss interim leadership. Miss Whitmore, please remain available. Selah sat down slowly, her legs trembling. She had walked into this room as the forgotten daughter, the girl assigned to make copies. She walked out as the majority shareholder of Whitmore Holdings. Geneva had given her a voice. Selah had used it. And the story wasn't finished yet. When Selah stepped out of the boardroom, she found herself gripping the railing overlooking the 42nd floor atrium. Her breath trembled. The city glittered far below in sunlit fragments, yellow cabs, silver rooftops, glass towers catching firelight. She heard a soft voice behind her. Selah. It was Susan Parker, one of the longest-serving board members. Her tone carried no pity, only respect. I owe you an apology, Susan said. Years ago, Geneva hinted she wanted you trained for leadership. Your father shut it down before the conversation even began. Selah swallowed. She told you that. She told several of us, Susan said gently. But Theodore had a way of making people believe his version of things. Selah had known this somehow, but hearing it confirmed tightened something in her chest. You are your grandmother's granddaughter, Susan added. She saw your potential long before anyone else did. Today you simply proved her right. Selah managed a small smile. Thank you. Susan squeezed her arm. Be ready. The next few weeks will be intense. If you need guidance, call me. Susan walked away, heels echoing against polished marble. Selah remained at the railing for another moment, letting herself feel the weight and the relief of what had happened. The elevator pinged. Victor Ames stepped out, his expression unreadable until he approached. You did well, he said. Very well. My hands were shaking the whole time. Confidence isn't the absence of fear, Victor replied. It's acting despite it. She inhaled slowly. What happens now? Now, Victor said, you prepare for the transition. The company will need stability. The board will need reassurance. And the public will need an explanation. Selah nodded. The fear was still there, but something else had awakened beside it. Something her father had never nurtured, something Geneva had known all along. Her own strength. That afternoon, the board reconvened without Theodore. Selah returned to the long table, still unsure where to sit. Margaret motioned her toward the seat beside her, far from the copy room corner of her past. Chairman Hartley cleared his throat. Our first task is appointing interim leadership. Whitmore Holdings cannot operate without an acting CEO while we search for a permanent one. Murmurs spread across the table. Richard Holloway spoke first. We need someone who understands the company, knows its culture, and can steady the ship after today's events. Cameron was notably absent, an intentional decision by the board to avoid theatrics. Susan Parker leaned forward. Selah, would you consider joining the executive committee during the transition? Selah blinked. Me. You own the majority of this company, Susan said. It's time you learn to lead it. Victor Ames entered as legal counsel, supporting the transition. Hartley continued. We propose Margaret as interim CEO. She has the experience, the board's trust, and Geneva's legacy behind her. Margaret inclined her head. I will serve only temporarily. The next decade belongs to someone younger. Her eyes softened when they landed on Selah. Voting commenced. Unanimous. When the formalities ended, Margaret turned to Selah. Your grandmother prepared me for this. She told me explicitly. Guide Selah when the time comes, but do not shield her. She must grow into the role. Selah felt her throat tighten. She planned all of this. Geneva never did anything accidentally, Margaret replied. She knew your father would implode under the weight of his own ambition. And she knew you, quiet, patient, observant, would one day step forward. Selah's eyes stung. I won't let her down. You won't, Margaret said. You already haven't. The meeting adjourned. And for the first time, Selah didn't linger in the corridor like an outsider waiting for permission. She walked out like someone who finally belonged. That evening, as dusk turned the sky lavender, Selah returned to her apartment. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the neighbor's balcony. On her kitchen table lay the mahogany box, Geneva's last message, still open. Selah sat in front of it, pulling out the old partnership document again. The yellowed pages carried decades of signatures, margins filled with Geneva's neat notes. A photo slipped loose. Selah at age 7, grinning toothlessly beside Geneva, both holding blueprint drafts of a new Whitmore building. Selah smiled. She remembered that day. The sunlight, the enormity of the paper, the way Geneva let her help by drawing squares that represented office floors. Geneva had always treated her like she mattered. She hadn't been wrong. A soft knock startled her. Selah opened the door to find Victor Ames standing quietly. Sorry to drop by unannounced, he said. I wanted to make sure you got home safely. I did, Selah replied, stepping back to let him in. Victor noticed the mahogany box. The box? She nodded. I found a letter inside. It's a lot. Geneva had more faith in you than anyone, he said gently. She used to talk about you non-stop in our legal meetings. Drove everyone crazy. Selah laughed softly. She never told me that. She didn't want to pressure you, Victor said. She believed you'd step into your own power when you were ready. Selah looked down at the will, the documents, the USB drive full of truth. I'm scared, she admitted. Good, Victor said. It means you understand the responsibility. She exhaled. I don't know how to lead a company. You know how to learn. Geneva valued that more than experience. The fear in her chest loosened, replaced by something steadier. Not confidence yet, but possibility. News of the board meeting leaked within 48 hours. Major financial outlets ran headlines. Whitmore Holdings removes CEO amid internal power shift. Commentators speculated wildly. Who was Selah Whitmore? Why had Geneva bypassed her eldest son? Was there scandal? Fraud? Coup? Reporters camped outside the Whitmore Tower lobby and outside Selah's apartment building, cameras waiting like restless birds. Margaret issued a formal press statement explaining the board's vote of no confidence. She did not mention Selah by name, yet, but emphasized the company's commitment to stability and ethical governance. Inside the company the atmosphere shifted. Employees whispered in elevators. Some sent Selah quiet emails. Curiosity, support, shock. One message stood out. Your grandmother believed in you. Some of us did too. Congrats. It was from Janine, a senior accountant who had always smiled at Selah in the hallway. Meanwhile, Theodore retreated from public appearances entirely. Rumors swirled, anger, humiliation, legal threats, but none had substance. Cameron posted nothing on social media, a fact noticed by everyone. On Friday, Selah met with Margaret and the remaining board members for a strategic overview. Charts, projections, supply chain audits. Topics that had once seemed beyond reach. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. By noon, Richard Holloway leaned back and whispered to Susan, "She's sharper than he ever let her be." Selah wasn't sure she heard it, but she could feel the shift. People looked at her differently now. Not as a background figure. Not as an afterthought. As a leader in training. When Victor walked her to the elevator after the meetings, he said quietly, "You'll be running this place sooner than you think." Selah shook her head. "One step at a time." "That's all leadership is," Victor replied. "A series of steps no one believes you can take, until you do." The elevator doors closed, and Selah felt something stirring, belonging. 3 weeks later, Selah received an unexpected call. Her phone buzzed with a number she recognized instantly, though she hadn't seen it in years. Theodore. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." Silence. Then a strained voice. "Selah. I need to see you." She closed her eyes. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," he whispered. The word startled her. She had never heard her father plead. 5 minutes, he added. Curiosity outweighed caution. She agreed to meet in a small cafe near Whitmore Tower. When she entered, she saw him at a corner table. He looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. His hands trembled slightly around his coffee cup. "Thank you for coming," he said. Selah sat wary. "What do you want?" He let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know she changed the will." Selah studied him. "You tried to cut her voting rights." "That was business," he snapped. Then softer, "At least, I told myself it was." She didn't reply. He stared at the table. "I didn't expect to lose everything." "Neither did I," Selah said. "When you told me I was slow." His face tightened. "I was trying to toughen you." "No," she corrected. "You were trying to shrink me." He didn't deny it. After a long silence, Theodore said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to say I know I failed you." The words landed heavy. Imperfect, incomplete, but real. "Thank you for saying it," Selah replied quietly. "But my life isn't built around waiting for your apology." Theodore nodded, defeated. "I know." He stood. "I hope you find peace." As she walked away, she felt no triumph, no vindication, only release. She had carried his disappointment for years. Now she set it down, leaving the cafe lighter than she entered. Summer arrived with a warm breeze and a growing sense of stability at Whitmore Holdings. Margaret, though interim CEO, insisted Selah attend every high-level meeting, every strategy session, every negotiation. "You need exposure," Margaret said. "A leader is shaped in the trenches." Selah shadowed department heads, learned the company's infrastructure from warehouse logistics to digital integration. She wasn't perfect. Some meetings left her overwhelmed. Some concepts felt foreign. But every day, she grew more fluent in a language Theodore had insisted she could never learn. One morning, during a meeting on international expansion, Selah raised her hand. "Why haven't we pursued a partnership with Easton Tech?" The room fell silent. Richard blinked. "Easton Tech. They're too big. They'd never consider a mid-tier subsidiary." "We're not mid-tier," Selah said. "We have Geneva Whitmore's legacy. And we have technology patents we're not fully using." Margaret tapped her pen thoughtfully. "She's not wrong." Within a week, Selah and Margaret were in a conference room with Easton Tech executives. Selah presented calmly, confidently. She outlined a long-term digital infrastructure plan that impressed even the skeptical CFO. After the meeting, Margaret whispered, "Do you see it now?" "See what?" "What Geneva saw." Selah felt heat rise in her chest. Pride, not fear. Then came a surprise. Easton Tech requested a follow-up meeting, this time specifically asking for Selah to lead the proposal. It was the first time Selah's name stood alone in a corporate request. She returned to her apartment that night and placed the mahogany box in the center of her table. "I'm trying," she whispered to Geneva's letter. "I hope it's enough." A quiet certainty settled inside her. Geneva hadn't chosen her out of sentiment. She had chosen her because she already knew what Selah was only beginning to discover: her own capability. 1 month after the Easton Tech negotiations, the board convened again to decide long-term leadership. The air in the room felt different this time. Anticipatory, less tense, more curious. Selah sat near the center, not the edges. Chairman Hartley opened the session. "Our agenda today: to appoint a permanent CEO for Whitmore Holdings." Murmurs rippled through the room. Selah looked at Margaret, who gave her a small nod of reassurance. Richard Holloway spoke first. "Before we discuss candidates, I want to acknowledge the company's remarkable stabilization over the past 2 months. That is, in no small part, due to Margaret's leadership and Miss Whitmore's involvement." Selah felt her chest tighten. Susan Parker added, "I've worked at this company for 32 years. I haven't felt this hopeful in a decade." Chairman Hartley folded his hands. "The floor is open for nominations." Margaret stood. "I nominate Miss Selah Whitmore for Chief Executive Officer." The room erupted in whispers. Selah's breath caught. "Margaret." "Hear me out," Margaret said. "She does not yet have the decades of experience some CEOs possess, but she has intelligence, temperament, and vision, qualities that cannot be taught. Geneva once said, 'A leader is someone who sees what the company must become, not what it has been.' Selah has that gift." Susan nodded. "Seconded." Richard raised his hand. "Thirded." Chairman Hartley addressed Selah gently. "Miss Whitmore, do you accept the nomination?" Her pulse hammered. Voices swam. Geneva's words echoed in her mind. She must grow into the role. Selah inhaled. "I do." They voted. 9-4. 2 against. 1 abstained. Chairman Hartley smiled. "Congratulations, CEO Whitmore." Selah's breath left her in a single rush. Tears welled but didn't fall. She wasn't just seen. She wasn't just included. She was leading. Finally. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind. Press conferences, interviews, transition meetings, investor calls. Reporters demanded explanations. Was she qualified? Was she a puppet? Was this nepotism? Selah answered each question calmly, directly. "I earned this position by board vote. My grandmother trusted my judgment. And I intend to honor that trust." Public reception shifted swiftly when the Easton Tech partnership was announced. Analysts called it innovative, promising, unexpected. For the first time, Whitmore Holdings began trending for something positive. Employees who had previously walked past Selah without acknowledgement now greeted her warmly, asked for input, invited her into brainstorming sessions. She moved into Geneva's former office, a room she had only ever glimpsed from a distance. The first time she stepped inside, she froze. Geneva's portrait hung above the bookshelves, her gaze strong and steady. Selah approached it slowly. "I hope I'm doing this right," she whispered. Victor, who had accompanied her, cleared his throat. She'd be thrilled. Selah touched the edge of the polished desk. "I don't want to become what my father was. I don't want power to change me." "It won't," Victor said. "You're too aware of what power abused looks like." Later that evening, Selah sat alone, reviewing quarterly projections. For the first time, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She saw patterns, opportunities, connections her father had missed because he refused to see beyond his own ego. At sunset, she opened the balcony doors. The city glowed beneath her. She felt Geneva everywhere, in the walls, in the structure, in the legacy she had built. I'll take care of it, Selah whispered into the wind. I promise. And she meant it. Months passed. Under Selah's guidance, Whitmore Holdings launched a transparent compensation initiative, expanded sustainability programs, and restructured outdated departments. Employees began referring to her as the quiet storm, because she didn't shout, didn't bully, didn't flex authority. She simply changed things. Cameron resurfaced eventually, requesting a meeting. Selah agreed, not out of obligation but closure. Cameron entered her office looking smaller, dimmer. You won, Cameron said flatly. Congratulations. Selah shook her head. This wasn't a competition. It was, Cameron insisted. I just didn't know you were playing. Selah studied her sister's face. I'm sorry for what you lost. But you weren't supposed to inherit a company built on lies. Cameron's voice cracked. I don't know who I am without Dad's version of the world. Then find out, Selah said softly. Not for him. For you. Cameron blinked back tears. Do you hate me? No, Selah replied. But I can't carry you anymore. They parted quietly. Two women unraveling the legacy of a father who had pitted them against each other long before they understood the rules. That night, Selah returned home and watered the small fern she kept on her windowsill, Geneva's favorite plant. Her life had reshaped itself completely. New routines, new responsibilities, new relationships. Victor became a constant presence, not romantic but steady, grounding. Aunt Eleanor visited often, proud beyond measure. And Selah learned, day by day, that leadership was never about perfection. It was about integrity, courage, and the humility to keep learning. When she finally lay in bed that night, she whispered into the quiet, I'm not invisible anymore. The room didn't answer, but she felt it, the shift. She had become her own force. A year after the boardroom upheaval, Whitmore Holdings celebrated its strongest quarter in 15 years. Journalists credited visionary restructuring. Investors praised a leader who understands both the past and the future. But Selah didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. She spent the anniversary morning at Geneva's grave. The cemetery was quiet, birdsong cutting through the crisp autumn air. Selah placed a single white lily on the headstone. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when no one else did. For giving me the chance to build something better. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead as if answering her. She closed her eyes. I hope you're proud. When she opened them again, Victor was walking toward her, hands in his pockets. Board wants you to see the quarterly report, he said. But I told them it could wait. Selah smiled. Thank you. They stood side by side in silence. Finally Victor asked, So what now? Selah looked at the city skyline in the distance. The buildings she once thought were out of reach, the world she once believed she didn't belong to. Now, she said slowly, I lead, grow. And I make sure no one in this company ever feels as unseen as I once did. She turned to him. Legacy isn't about power. It's about impact. Victor nodded. Geneva would say the same. Selah exhaled softly. The weight she'd carried her whole life, the doubt, the dismissal, the silence, lifted for good. She wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. She wasn't the girl in the copy room. She wasn't the shadow of her father's ambition. She was Selah Whitmore, CEO, leader, builder of a new chapter. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready for it. And she walked toward it without looking back.